The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Oshkosh Media, the City of Oshkosh, or your video service provider.
Hi, I'm Ted Savas from Savas Beatty Publishing. We are at the Milwaukee Civil War Roundtable in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It is September 10th, 2020, and I'm going to introduce a new book we've got. Just came out. I opened it up today. Defending the Arteries of Rebellion, Confederate Naval Operations in the Mississippi River Valley by Neil Chatelain. Make sure and pick this hot book up. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or at savasbeatty.com. And tonight I will be speaking on Payne's Farm and the Mine Run campaign, and we look forward to having you hear the talk. Thank you. I'm going to give you a little different kind of talk tonight. I'm going to tell you about a battle that most of you have probably never heard of, or if you have heard of it, you don't know anything about it. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. We're going to sort of stay at the macro level. So we're sort of going to fly around and look at things, and we're just going to sort of get a basic understanding of it. Once in a while, I'll drop down and we'll go down to ground level a little bit to tell you some of the interesting tidbits about it. But we're going to stay sort of high. And then we're going to go into the second half of this, or maybe the last third of it, and that'll be how we discovered where the battle was, and then how we mapped out the field, relic hunted the field, and turned over hundreds of things and all the maps to a preservation society, and how they've now preserved the field. And it's magnificent. It's a terrific field. Hasn't changed at all. So here's how we did this. I started reading in my library, and I was reading about Mine Run campaign, which I don't know much about, and not much had been written about it. And I started reading about it. I started reading about Payne's Farm, and it was quite a battle. It was a very sharp, really about a 2.5 hour battle. A lot of casualties. It seemed pretty important, but you really couldn't find much on it. So I looked through the official records, and there were a lot of battle reports on this little battle, and a lot of diary entries and different kinds of things. So there was a lot of information on it. I thought, I want to go visit this battlefield, but nobody knew where it was, because when we went to followed the original maps, it didn't make sense, because the only maps that were published on it was one in Civil War Times Illustrated in early 1960s, and then another one that was copied from that in the 1980s. They weren't even remotely close to being correct. You could walk out there and you go, this couldn't be right. So we went back. I had a buddy of mine in Richmond, Virginia, named Paul Sacred. Paul and I copied a bunch of OR reports and diary entries and all that. We went out there and tried to figure out where the battlefield was. And we found it, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. All right, why do I call this Ain't No Battle Fought Here? When we went out to see where the battlefield was, Paul happened to know the major landowner out there, called him Farmer. And Farmer had a big cattle operation and grazed a lot of cows. And we went out there, and Paul said, we want to walk around the ground and take a look, and because we, want to find this Payne's Farm battle. The battle, he said, well, ain't no battle fought here. Paul says, no, we think there was. No, there ain't no battle fought here. There was a few bullets once in a while, but the battle was like a mile that way over those hills and on the other side of the woods. Well, he was wrong, we thought. So we start looking around, and this is what we found. All right, so with that in mind, let's go back in time. It is November of 1863, and Lee's army has suffered a serious defeat at Gettysburg, and it's also suffered 3 more defeats very quickly. Bristow Station in October, Rappahannock Station in November, and at the same time, Battle of Kelly's Ford. 3 quick, sharp defeats. Lee's army was up by the Rappahannock River, and he decided it was safer to fall back, and he falls back behind the Rapidan River. Now, Lee's army at this time only has 2 corps. I'm going to keep this fairly simple. 2 corps, because Longstreet's corps is out west with Bragg's army is behind the Rappahannock River, and his army looks something like that. And it's about a 20-mile line. He's got it pulled back on the right-hand side. You see Ewell's men on the left side. You got Hill's men over here. And on the other side of the river is George Meade's Army of the Potomac. And Meade was ready to go into winter quarters. It's middle of November. He goes to Washington, D.C., and Lincoln says, Lee's army is weak. Corps is gone. It's time to try to get him in one more battle. So Meade, who's not happy about that, goes back and sits his commanders down. He says, all right, we got to find a way to get at him. What are we going to do? So they take a look around, and they find out, and they come back with some very interesting information. They find out that the fords are open down here. Joanna Ford, Jacobs Ford, Eli's Ford, they're open. And these two major roads, the Orange Turnpike and the Orange Plank Road, consider them freeways, basically, that are parallel running behind Lee's army. They're open. They're not obstructed. There's virtually no one on them. They're not protected. Down over here, it's open. So Meade thinks, okay, if I can cross some men down over here and get on these major roads, I can come behind Lee's army and beat him before he can figure out how to form a line of battle and confront me. What you're going to see, and if we have some time, we'll sort of integrate this just a little bit, you're seeing a prelude to the Wilderness Campaign, and very few people make this comparison, but I think it's an apt comparison, and we'll talk about that as we go. So Meade decides we're going to attack or maneuver in three different columns. He's going to have, on the far right, he's going to have the 5th Corps and the 1st Corps. That's under Sykes and Newton cross. And as you can see, follow the arrows there. They're going to go down. They're going to go all the way down to the Orange Plank Road, and they're going to go out here to a place called New Hope Church. That's their first destination. So they're going to go like this. Warren's Corps, the 2nd Corps, Warren's Corps is going to come down here, and it's going to go right there to Robertson's Tavern. We'll call it Locust Grove. All right? And then you're going to have two big corps. The biggest corps of the Army is the 6th Corps under Sedgwick, and you have French's Corps, which is not as big of a corps, and that was Sickles' former corps. Under William Henry French, 3rd Corps, it's going to come down here, and it's going to come down, and it's going to form on Warren's right flank. Well, the reason he put 6th Corps back here is because it was the closest to the Confederates, and just in case French would run into trouble, he'd have support. All right? Well, the problem is you got to have surprise. And they're going to move on the 24th of November. Rain comes. Can't move on the 24th. It's raining on the 25th. Can't move on the 25th. So we'll start moving on the 26th. So Lee, he's up on Clark's Mountain, and he's looking, and they're watching, and the scouts are saying they've issued 3 days of rations. They're going to move. Well, if you issue 3 days of rations, the army's going to move, and sure enough, Meade's army's going to start to move. And so Lee immediately tells his men, get ready, get your ammo, get everything ready to go, get ready to move on a moment's notice. Lee doesn't know, just like Grant in 1864, Lee doesn't know, is his army the objective or is Richmond the objective? He doesn't know. If Richmond is the objective, Lee plans to move down as fast as he can and strike him in the flank. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? If his army is the objective, then he's going to find good defensive positions and let Meade come to him. His best defensive position is back over here. It's called Mine Run Creek. And there are some big defenses there that he'd already started that he would fall back to if his army was the objective. Well, it didn't take long because everything starts being cocked up right away. If you look at the top, the army starts marching. 3rd Corps starts marching under French. And the front division is under a guy named William, under Henry Prince. Henry Prince is a Mexican War veteran, a West Point graduate, did well in the Mexican War but was severely wounded. He didn't accomplish much in the Civil War up to this point other than he got captured at Cedar Mountain. And they didn't trade him for him until like 6 or 8 months. I mean, they didn't really want him back that badly, I guess. So he sat there. Prince was a fastidious man, right? Everything had to be just like this, perfect, or he wasn't going to move. That's Prince. So Prince, who's leading the division of the most important column, starts out, they get to the river to cross. It's on the 26th of November. Timing is everything, and he stops. He says, I've got to bring up artillery, I've got to shell the other bank, I have to bring up some infantry, I have to push it across because I'm sure it's going to be a contested crossing. Well, it wasn't a contested crossing, and all the scouts knew it wasn't contested. They'd been across the river. And French and Prince went back and forth for hours. Finally, they go across, the scouts, again, and infantry from the 11th New Jersey. There's nobody over here. Okay, let's start crossing. They go up there to cross, and they're one pontoon bridge short. Fredericksburg, same mistake. So they can't cross. So all the wheeled vehicles have to go 4 miles down to Germanna Ford. That takes some time. Finally, they go to cross. They cross the river. It's nighttime now. Part of the 3rd Corps is across. The 6th Corps is way behind them, strung out. It's 32,000 men total. They're nowhere near the objective, and they stop for the night. So that's bad. Lee's men, meanwhile, are, of course, on the move. There's William Henry French. French was an alcoholic. He was a sort of a bumbling general. He did not inspire his men. They didn't like him. They didn't have confidence in him. And this is the battle that really shows you why they didn't have confidence in him. So this is basically looking north, okay? So you see the Rapidan River up there, and now you see on the morning of the 27th of November, about 11 o'clock, this is what it looked like. So you see those 2 corps are down where they're supposed to be. Lee's men have come down to meet them. You see Warren's corps, 2nd Corps, took over for Hancock. They're where they're supposed to be. Early's men are here. This is Ewell's men, Early. This is Hill. 1st Corps is going to come up and get between these two. I'm sorry, 1st Corps is going to come up and get here and fill this gap. 3rd Corps and 6th Corps are supposed to come down and be right there, but they're not. They get to the Widow Morris house, and Prince doesn't know what to do, so he stops. He's supposed to get here as fast as possible, and he's supposed to go to the right, which is this route. That's on the Widow Morris Road. This is the Raccoon Ford Road. It's a short where it's about a mile here and a mile there, and he's done. But he sits and he waits. Hour goes by, 2 hours go by. He's worried because if he goes this way, it's an extra couple miles. It'll take too long. Well, French is way back here. By the time French gets up there, French is saying, get going, get going. Prince says, which way? French sends a message to Meade and says, Meade's like, where are you? Where the heck are you guys? French says, well, we're down by the Orange Plank Road, and we're waiting for Warren. Makes no sense at all. He was drunk. Meade says, why in God's name are you waiting for Warren? You have no orders to wait for anyone. Get moving now. French orders Prince to take this short road. So Prince finally starts moving. This is what the roads look like. That's the Raccoon Ford Road that Johnson's Confederate division marches on. The Widow Morris Road looked exactly the same. You can see the wilderness area, how it looks in the terrain. A terrible road. You can march about 4 guys there, 1 wagon, 1 artillery piece, and there's not many places to go off the road. All right. So Prince, in order to be safe, sends some cavalry ahead, and he dismounts them. They fan out into the woods, and they move toward the road, and they see artillery pieces and Confederate wagons moving. Rather than falling back, they open fire. And pretty soon, pop, 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 you start getting a little skirmish fire. They found the Confederates. What do? Well, who they found was Allegheny Johnson. Allegheny Johnson was probably the most aggressive division commander in Lee's army, certainly in Ewell's Corps. He was a Mexican War guy, Seminole War veteran. He fought early on in the West Virginia, and he got shot in the ankle, hurt his ankle pretty badly, and so they called him Old Allegheny because the Allegheny Mountains, Allegheny Johnson, and he walked with a big club, so they called him Old Clubby. One staff officer wrote it was really Old Chubby because he was a pretty good-sized guy. Well, Johnson immediately figures out, oh my God, they're firing into us. All his men are strung out on this road over 3 miles in basically single file. So they're stretched out all the way down to Locust Grove. So the head of the column is at Locust Grove. The Union guys struck the rear of the column for all practical purposes. Johnson rides all the way back and tells all of his men to face this way, face north. You got Stuart, Maryland Stuart's brigade in the back, got the artillery and wagons. You got Walker's Stonewall Brigade. You got Stafford's Louisiana Brigade. And down here, here's Locust Grove where they're supposed to be. Jones's troops are all the way down here. It's a Virginia Brigade. These guys had all just fought at Culp's Hill, at Gettysburg, where they were decimated, right? They charged, they were beaten. They were charged, they were beaten back. They really made essentially no gains. They were fighting people they could barely see. The terrain was terrible. They lost a lot of their regimental command structure, and it's going to show itself here. So these guys counter-march, they come back, they take these wagons, they push them off the road. There happens to be a little clearing there. And Johnson faces his men this way. He has no idea what he's facing, right? Prince, meanwhile, deploys both of his brigades here. And remember, the rest of the 3rd Corps and 6th Corps are all the way back here, okay? There's George Stuart. Very average commander, well liked by his men, but very average. There's a book, I can't think of his name, it's a Prussian staff officer who was with Heinrichs, I think his name was. His memoirs came out a few years ago, and it's an amazing memoir, or his diary. And Stuart and Allegheny Johnson, his division commander, when they were both captured at Spotsylvania the following year, he writes in his journal, well, they were both captured and the Yankees can keep them. They weren't all that well thought of militarily, but Stuart's men pretty much liked him. All right, so Johnson doesn't know what he's facing, but he does know there's a lot of Union guys down here. So Johnson tells Stuart, pull back at basically like almost a 90-degree angle to protect your flank so they can't come around. He tells these guys to all line up and get ready to go, and he starts assessing the situation. What do? He tells Jubal Early, who's in Locust Grove, here's what's going on. We were fired into by cavalry. And Jubal Early says, my scouts tell me all there is cavalry. Only light infantry, maybe, but probably all cavalry. Attack and drive them away. Now, we are dealing with the wilderness, right? It is second growth, woods, swamp, undulating hills, creeks, marsh, punctuated with open bits of land. It's a terrible place to try to fight a battle, especially to maneuver. And he says to the most aggressive division commander he's got, attack and drive them away. Well, Early doesn't know what he's facing, and Johnson doesn't know what he's facing. But Johnson likes to go on the offensive, and he tells his men, we are going to attack. And then he gives them the attack plan. The attack plan is going to be Stuart, the hardest plan you can pull off in a battle. What is it? Come on, all you military minds. What's the most complicated attack plan you can devise? A double envelopment, right? So he's going to have Stuart attack this way and do a right wheel and collapse this flank. He's going to have Walker go straight forward. He's going to have Stafford and Jones do a giant left wheel, and like one of Lance Erdogan's muskrat traps, right? That's his plan. It's insane. He doesn't know the terrain. He doesn't know what he's facing. He doesn't know where their flanks are. He doesn't know how strong they are. That's his plan. He's going to expose his flank and their flank, not knowing where the Union Army is. Over ground, he doesn't, all he knows is the ground's going to be terrible. Okay. That's the plan. So they start moving. Let me tell you, let's drill down just for a second to the 37th Virginia, which has one of the most amazing experiences, just to show you what this is like. Stuart, who's not a very good brigade commander, loses control of his brigade about 2 minutes in. It starts going like every direction. Well, the 37th is under a guy named Titus Vespasian Williams. Makes you think his family loved Roman history. And Titus Williams, he's out there and he's all by himself. And these guys, you're going to see in just a second, they attack this way because they're supposed to wheel around. Well, Williams can't join them because there are 2 regiments on his flank. Well, that's a problem. And at this point, they're like over here. There are also guys in his front. So Williams only has about 250 guys. He doesn't know what to do, but he proves that he's an amazing tactician. He spreads all of his regiment out into a skirmish order, every guy about 10 feet. Now, why did he do that? What's he doing? Maximizing his front, but he's also doing what? He's bluffing. If you're attacking another force and you attack and you see a skirmish line, what goes through your head? What's behind the skirmish line? The main battle line, right? So you pull back and you have to think, okay, now what's back there? Well, there's nobody back there. But he bluffs and he holds them back for about an hour. And so as these guys are advancing this way, this guy is out here like this, trying to hold back these guys. And they're fighting pretty good for a skirmish fight. And then pretty soon these guys flank him. And so Williams has to fall back this way and he fights them that way. It's amazing. He fights this amazing tactical battle all the way down here until he finally flanks them and drives these guys back this way. He ends up facing about 1.5 brigades all on his own. It's an incredible display of tactical genius. All right. Prince is here, and pretty soon the next division under Carr comes up, and they start extending the line here, and you begin to see that Johnson has no idea what he's facing. He has no idea how many troops he's facing. The people set up, they start moving forward. Stonewall Brigade is here. Stafford. And you can see the Union line now is nice and strong. All right. As these guys are attacking here, and you can see Williams is way out here, there's about a 350-yard gap here, and there is nobody there, not a soul. Nobody. You've got these guys charging here, and there's an amazing amount of battle reports and diaries and letters of what happens here. It's just they're pulling guys over fences and capturing them. There's bayonet fighting. There's charging a Union battery and canister fighting. They dug rifle pits. We found, I think, we identified 32 different rifle pits that are out there. It's incredible. Like the Wilderness, as soon as they had a few free moments, they started digging, and it's cold. It's really cold. It's only like 40 degrees. But they dig. It's the early part of that time of the war, that transition to where you stop, you have 20 minutes, you dig. It's the beginning of that. So let's talk about the Stonewall Brigade, which has a very interesting experience. So they start moving this way. Well, this unit is part of Stewart's brigade. That's the 10th Virginia. It's supposed to keep connection here and here. It can't. Because Stewart's men are fighting up here. These guys are marching here faster than this unit can keep up, and the gap is way too long, and so he can't keep up either. And so you've got big gaps here as well. Stonewall Brigade moves out, reaches a fence line, charges into the field, and nature plays a little trick on Walker, who leads the Stonewall Brigade. The trick is that it looks like it's flat open land, and you can't see Morris's brigade where they are. It's a little trick of geography, a little teeny crest. They don't know they're there, and they're only, I mean, I'm not kidding, it's maybe 2 of these rooms distant. They're close. They go out into that field, and bam, these Vermont troops just go, and those Stonewall guys fall in front of that, in the open field. They're just hit bad. Well, they immediately go back into that fence line. Walker wants to get him to charge again, so he jumps his horse back out there, and he's out there all by himself carrying a flag. And the men are shooting at him. Somehow they miss him. God knows how they missed him. But his men wouldn't go back out again. So he jumps back in, he's mad. And they spend the rest of the battle fighting from behind this fence line, firing at an oblique this way. Okay, so these guys are involved in a lot of fighting here. Walker's better stuck there. One of his units, the 5th Virginia, is way out here. It marches, it's the first one to use the Payne farm lane. It sees the fighting is over here. It turns in the farm lane and fights this way, like an L. Now these guys aren't visible yet, so that's the fighting that's going on. All right. Stafford's men. Stafford's men come through the woods, they come up on the top, and this is high. It's a hill. And I've stood on it before, and I've looked at some of these reports, and I've walked this field 100 times. And when you walk out, you can see like an amphitheater, everything. It is the most amazing sight. And so these guys are standing here, and they can see Walker's guys getting hit in the field, falling back. So Stafford realizes they need help, and they need help fast. So he moves his men down as fast as he can, and he lines them up in the Payne farm lane. So now you got this big L, right? Well, Stafford wants his men to attack, and he wants them to attack here. The problem is that he can't get any kind of coordination. He tries, the 10th Louisiana goes out, it falls back. Another Louisiana unit goes out, it falls back. Some of them go 100 yards, fall back. Some of them go 5 yards, go back. Some of them don't move at all. Stafford's a pretty good general. He cannot get his own brigade to coordinate at all. Why is that? It's because his regimental leadership had been slaughtered at Gettysburg. And these guys were new. The guys that were lieutenants and captains are now trying to command regiments and executive officers. And they were hard hit. And they're a little gun shy. And they were kind of half-hearted. They go out there, they fell back. Stafford's pretty mad. He's riding a horse up and down the line. What's his horse's name? Anybody know? Harry Hayes. Who's Harry Hayes? Harry Hayes is another Louisiana guy, right? And they both get killed 6 months later in the wilderness. Stafford dies and Harry Hayes dies. And he's riding Harry Hayes. He gets wounded pretty good. Stafford gets hit there, but he stays in the battle. So he's fighting here. Jones's men are still way out here, and they're moving around this way to complete the wheel. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. All right, so Jones's men are out here, and if you go down the hill, who's read Worsham's book? The 21st Virginia guy, one of the Foot Cavalry or whatever it's called. Great book by John Worsham. Highly recommend it. He has a funny little passage in there because at the bottom of that hill in Jones's brigade, there's a little runoff from Russell's Creek. It's all muddy and swampy. And the men lose some of their shoes in there. Now remember, it's like 38, 40 degrees. and some of the shoes are in the mud. And he says, well, a lot of the men lost 1 or 2 shoes there, and they got a chuckle out of it because the officers couldn't ride through it because it was so muddy. They had to dismount and walk in the mud like the rest of us. And the foot soldiers thought that was pretty clever. It's still there. The creek is still there. The marshy part is still there. I've been there on November 27th, the anniversary, because you really want to see what it's like, same time of year. It's still there. It still runs right through there. So Jones's men come through, they line up there, and he tries to do the same thing that Stafford does. He can't get his men to work either. Not only is there no coordination in the brigade, they can't get 2 brigades on an open level field, complete visibility, and they can't get them to coordinate. This is Lee's veteran army, and they can't coordinate 2 simple brigades on flat land. Really tells you something about the leadership. Well, they go out there, they can't fight, they fall back. There's a captain in one of I think it's the 40th Virginia. He is so mad at his men, he threatens that if they won't charge, he's going to lay out there like a flat breastwork, and the men can use his body to hide behind. Well, his men don't charge, so he's, God, I got to do this, really? So he goes out there and he lays down. He's an ample man, that's how he's described. So he lays down there, and 2 or 3 of his guys lay down behind him and use him as a breastworks, putting their muskets on him, firing and hiding behind him. And after 2 or 3 rounds, this guy jumps up and he's using words that you wouldn't use in front of your mom, and then they go back to the line. So that was kind of a funny little episode there. So this is what's going on. If you look at that battle, you can see just how off base Allegheny Johnson's attack was. He was going to crush all of that. Look what happened. Not even close. All right, so up here, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. It's called Kiefer, Kiefer's Ridge. I started calling it Kiefer's Ridge. I'm kind of happy to say that people call it Kiefer's Ridge. Kiefer was on there with his brigade, and he had a beautiful field of fire here. And this is one of those places where when you study Civil War history closely, you realize how much of what they wrote just wasn't so. Couple examples. There's a report from one of the Louisiana guys who talks about how far he went. And another of his ancestors, descendants, was telling me this guy got within 50 paces of the line, and the line blew them back, and they had to retreat. And I said, no, I didn't. He said, yeah, he did. He goes, no, he didn't. He said, well, how would you know? You weren't there. I said, well, he didn't. Here's why. What they couldn't see from here is that there's a deep ravine here with another creek through it. And that ravine is about 80 yards or so in front of the main Union line. So if you had gotten there, you'd have to cross this deep creek ravine. You'd have to get up, reorder your men 80 yards away, and charge and get that close, 50 paces, and then get beaten back and then not leave the ravine. Of course, you'd stay in the ravine, right? You wouldn't run back another 200 yards in open field. They never saw the ravine. So they could say, we were within 50 paces of the couldn't have been, because they didn't even know that there was a ravine that they'd have to cross. They couldn't have done it, and they didn't do it. So they fought like this until just about nighttime, and about halfway through the fighting, there's a Maryland battery, couple of guns, and they ride up here on the caissons, on the limbers. They're right up there, and as soon as they get into the free area, one of the guys on the caisson takes a bullet through the head and dies immediately. I've got this guy's diary. It's really incredible. And his friend takes him after the fighting. They unlimber here. They fight with 2 guns. It's the only Confederate artillery is here, and there are 2 guns down here. We'll talk about Carpenter in just a second. So he takes his buddy's body after the battle. It's dark. They go south of the road, and he buries him. And he's going to come back in the spring, and he marks the grave. He'll come back and get him and write to the family. Well, he comes back in the spring when they're coming back through here in the wilderness campaign. Can't find him. Never finds him. So he's still out there. On a side note, we do know that there are 2 burial trenches at Payne's farm. Both Confederate, and we don't know where they are. But I've got a letter from another guy who wrote and says he found a burial trench, and we believe it's, let's see, there's the lane. We think it's here, out here. So it's be all Virginians. And there's another one that's over here somewhere. And they won't tell us where it is, but we did use the information to help save the land, which was pretty nice. So it's nighttime. They've suffered about 550 Confederate casualties. Early never visits the front once. He's only about a mile and a half away. Heavy fighting. It's behind Lee's left. We're going to talk about that. And Early never visits. By the time they send reinforcements, it's dark. Dole's Georgia Brigade comes onto the field. He comes up this road here and goes out here. And Johnson orders everybody to fall back, and they end up falling back to the road here. The Union troops kept their formation here. None of Sedgwick's men got into the action. The Union side lost about 1,000 men. The fighting started at about 4. It's end of November. What time does it get dark? About 6. It's about a 2-hour fight. They say it's a 4-hour fight. It's not a 4-hour fight. It's a 2-hour fight. And they lost 1,000 Union guys and about 550 Confederate guys. It's a heavy, heavy fight. So they go back. They put their skirmishers out there. These skirmishers dug rifle pits as well. And that's sort of how the fighting ended at nighttime. Now I'm going to show you, this is the Civil War map that I first used when I first started researching this, that I told you was so wrong. I want you to think about this. This is the line you saw that they were fighting. Here's the lane, the Stonewall Brigade, and Stuart's scattered guys. These are the Union guys. This is how they had it on the map. Not only are the men completely disproportionate to the size, but they're like a mile and a half off. All right? What you also see a lot in history, especially Civil War history, is one guy builds on the next guy's work. And if the first guy's work is wrong, the second one is also wrong. And then it's a little more wrong, and then it's a little more wrong. Well, another guy did it, and I think it's here. Yeah. So the next book, it was one of the Howard books. This is how they presented it. Now, again, here's the lane. There's the Union, there's the rebel line, there's the Union guys. There's how he had it. It's no wonder the farmer didn't think there was fighting on his property. But people were writing about this battle like this is what happened. But they never looked at the original stuff. They never walked the ground. If you don't walk the ground, you can't understand what happened. Walking the ground is priceless. You can't write history without walking the ground. All right, this is a map. I spent 2 months putting this battle together. I had this giant easel with pieces of paper, and it's like a law school logic game, right? The 10th Virginia was here, but it was 2 regiments away from the 23rd, and the 23rd was facing right, but no. So you had to piece all this stuff together to make sense. And I ended up piecing it together and putting it together like this. And this is these are the relics we found in this area, basically. So I'm going to tell you how we found these. So we went to see Farmer, told him about the battle. Farmer says, go ahead and go out there and take a look. If you find anything, let me know. Well, the easiest reference point was Widow Morris Road and the Raccoon Ford Road, which is right here. Well, Carpenter set up 2 of his guns there. It's called a section of guns. And he fought his section of guns there the entire battle. And we know that there was a ravine out here because the 3rd North Carolina formed in the ravine and wrote about it. So Paul and I, there was one little, this field has not changed at all. It hadn't, this is 1991-ish. Field had not changed at all, other than a couple modern houses, but very few, hadn't changed. So there's one house here. So we went to the house and we said, hey, would you mind if, and the lady said, oh yeah, that's fine. And we said, well, we're looking, is there a ravine? She goes, oh yeah, there's a big ravine back there. Okay, so we go back into this ravine and there it is, exactly like they described it. Well, these guys dropped their packs and they didn't go back exactly. So we ended up finding all kinds of buckles, and we found ramrod, and we found buttons, and we found drop bullets, we found all kinds of stuff. Well, we were in the right place, right? Well, Carpenter fired canister at charging Union guys right about here. Well, we thought if we go in the woods, go about 100 yards, 150 yards out, start digging around, maybe we'll find some canister. And I can't remember the order I put this in. Oh yeah, there's a canister piece. That's my hand. So we were digging and digging and digging and digging, and after a couple hours, of course, under a big root, right? Couldn't be easy. I pull out a piece of canister. Well, lo and behold, we know what gun it was fired from, and we know whose gun it was fired from. So we knew we were in the right area. So we also started finding a lot of fired bullets, and you can tell most of the Confederates, not all of them, but most of them were using Gardner bullets. Gardner bullets didn't have rims on the bottom. They didn't have the grooves, and the regular mini ball that most of the Union guys fired did. So in front of a lot of the Union positions, we'd find the Gardner bullets. And in front of the Confederate positions, we'd find most of the other kinds of bullets, which was pretty interesting because then you could start placing these guys. Now, the 10th Virginia talked about a big hollow out here and how he got lost and he never really got into the battle. Well, you walk out there and there's the hollow. So we took the Stonewall Brigade reports, we stood on the road, and they talked about going in about 200, 250 yards, and you hit a fence and there's a big field. And I'm telling you, you read the reports, you walk in, and there it is. It hadn't changed at all. So we started digging along that fence and inside where these guys were all fighting, and the field in front was full of bullets where these guys were firing low. And behind there, you'd find drop bullets, you'd find another couple ramrods, you'd find all kinds of stuff. But we found the whole Stonewall position there. So it had not changed. It was exactly the same, and it was really quite exciting. So there's some of the bullets that we found. I can't remember if this was the first part of the field or not, but you can see a lot of these are smashed up. If they'd hit a tree or a rock, some of the ground, even though there had been some rain, some of the ground is like rock. I mean, really hard chunks of clay. And this lead is, it really deforms very easily. And so you can see just how deformed, some of these bullets are. Okay, that's a very young me. And Paul, my buddy, these are Spotsylvania. We had a friend that lives on the Spotsylvania Valley, and the artillery shells are from along the Appomattox River. We found all those in 2 days, but those are some of the pieces we were just lining up. So I wanted you to meet Paul. Paul's a good buddy of mine, and I really couldn't have had the permission to go and find this battlefield without Paul. Oh, Paul found that cross. It's a Catholic cross. He found that at Cedar Mountain in a field, and there's a diary of a Catholic priest who gets shot out there. Somebody talks about him, I can't remember exactly what it is, but he talks about losing his cross. And he finds a cross. Is it his? We don't know, but we thought that was pretty interesting. All right, let's jump to the other side of the field real quick. Stonewall Brigade, Stafford, Jones. You can see, you guys are kind of far away. These are all the different kinds of relics we found. And they're mapped, generally speaking, where they were. There wasn't obviously as much in the open here, right? Each one of these represents a lot of bullets. So there's this in front of the position, it was covered with them. In front of this, it was covered with them. Here's what's interesting. This is a little crest on this farm lane, the Payne farm lane. This goes down and then it goes up, like I told you. Well, this is an entire hillside here. We were out there digging, and I said to Paul, every bullet that they shot that didn't hit somebody or hit the ground in front hit the hill. He's like, oh yeah. So we go back to the hill. We could not get up off our knees for 3 days. I mean, you'd find something, you'd turn. You'd find something, I don't know, we found 500 bullets. I don't know, just the whole hill was full of bullets. This hill, Kiefer's Ridge, the whole front of the ridge was full of Confederate bullets. And what was real interesting is they had the first U.S. sharpshooters were there. I can't remember the kind of gun they used. It was a rim-fired gun. Might have been a Spencer. And there were pockets, like 3 or 4 unfired rounds. They were taking them out and clumping them on the ground. And when they fell back or it got dark, they left them there. We found them, like 4 or 5 clumps of them. They were still there. I mean, they were in the ground, but it was just incredible. So we had no doubt that we had found the right field, and we found literally hundreds of things. You'll see a little later the remains of a harmonica. We found a Louisiana Brigade harmonica, and we think it was the 10th Louisiana, because we pasted off. We figure it was probably from the 10th, but who knows. Let me talk just a little bit about this. There's a guy named Smith who had a brigade out here. He got lost. There's no way you can get lost. You can't. And he never got into the battle, and you don't know why. But the 87th, there's a big argument as to whether they got in the battle or whether these guys fought or not. They didn't. But I'm going to show you a perspective in just a second from this position looking this way. And then I'm going to show you what it looks like looking this way, so you can kind of get an idea of what that field looks like. Oh, there's a closer example of what some of that looked like. All right, so from the 87th, that's the guys off to the top there. This is looking across out of that ravine, looking over. This is the little creek in front of the Union position. It runs this way. This would be where the Madison house was. That's the lane. So Jones's men would have been here. Stafford's men would have been here. So you can kind of get an idea of what that ground looked like. It was wide open. This is Kiefer's Ridge, looking back into the woods behind them. So it's just flat land, and the ridge itself where they fought was about 3 of these out. So you can see it's flat. We have some diary entries from Union guys that were killed there, and they took them back in there. One guy took his brother, I think it was, back here and buried him, and they didn't find him either. They were going to come back, and they sent Graves guys back. They never found him either. He's back in there somewhere. All right, so this is halfway down the hill from Stafford's position. This is the farm lane. And so you're kind of, well, it's near the bottom of the hill. So you're down the bottom of the hill. This is part of that creek that's all marshy still. This is a buddy of mine. Then you'd climb that 150 or so yards, and then there's the farm lane, and the Union guys were about another 300 yards behind that, just to kind of give you an idea of what that looked like. All right, there's another guy when he was a little younger. So this is sort of in the middle of the Stafford-Jones line. Coming down that hill, you can kind of get an idea of how steep that hill is. And we were digging the hill and finding all those bullets. This is one of those times. So you can kind of see where Stafford and Jones were, and then they had skirmishers out here on the other side of that little creek there, just to protect the flank. That mustache, though, I mean, can I grow that back? No? All right. So there's that first photo I just showed you, was right about there, and then the other photo I showed you was right about there. There's the harmonica on the bottom, what's left of it, and a piece of grape shot, and one of the buckles we found, and some other things. There's a better view of some of those bullets. Let me see if I can see a Gardner. Here. There's a Gardner bullet with no, see the rim, the grooves here? The Gardner bullet doesn't have any grooves. There's another one over here. Those are mostly Southern. But you can see how bent up they get when they hit like a rock, and just what happens to them. There's a really, really good look at how chewed up those things get. Okay, everybody, 1, 2, 3. Ain't no battle fought here. It's a hell of a battle fought there. I would love to take your questions. Yes, sir.
When you were finding these artifacts, the bullets, were you using GPS at that time?
We didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah, I kind of thought so.
No, we were just using, you mean when we found the field? No, we just tried to figure out where the Raccoon Ford Road was and then tried to, when we thought we got to where we thought that intersection was, then we started looking for landmarks that matched the diaries. Then when we thought we were close, we dropped the metal detectors down and started finding stuff.
Did the land have evidence of cultivation?
Yeah, the big field that Stafford's been charged across and that Walker's been charged into, it had a little cultivation, but it was mostly had been pasture land for a couple generations. I don't know how far back, but they would graze cattle out there, and that part was not being tilled. And farmer who'd owned the land for, I don't know, 50 years, he didn't remember that part ever being tilled.
My family in farming, where a battle was, they didn't have to do anything. I mean, talking to them, the heaving of the ground, in the spring, talking to people,
Throw stuff
stuff
up.
would come up, and the comment was, it wasn't worth my time to bend down and pick up bullets.
They're everywhere. Yeah, and so
And so, I mean, it's just crazy to me that this farmer, saying there's nothing, and I would just think that
He-
natural heaving.
he thought they were overshots. He thought, oh, those bullets were just kind of sprayed here from the distance. A lot of the other stuff is in the woods. And they're not going in the woods, and they're not digging in the woods. And so a lot of this stuff is in the woods. And when they'd find a bullet once in a while, they just thought it was, because those bullets can go, a long way. And they just figured they were coming from over the ridge and dropping in the fields. It's crazy. I mean, I bet we found 1,000, more than 1,000, 2,000 relics. And the farmer, we opened up the trunk and showed him. He went, oh, I forgot to tell you. So he was shocked, right? So they were going to sell all the land. I took our maps, took a bunch of the stuff, went back to the APCWS, which is the Association for the Preservation of Civil War Sites. It's the American Trust, Battlefield Trust now. And my buddy Will Green ran it. And I said, Will, he lived there in Fredericksburg. This is, 15 miles outside Fredericksburg. And I tried to explain to him. He said, it's not really much of a battle. I said, are you crazy? It is a good-sized battle. It was really important. We didn't talk about this either, and we're gonna. And you got to preserve this land. It hasn't changed at all. Several years went by, and they didn't do anything. And then finally, the guy was going to sell off the land and build a golf course and condos. Because this is right outside Fredericksburg. I mean, it's booming, right? Well, then I thought, well, you know what? Let's let him know that there are dead on that property. So we took the 2 letters to him and showed him that there are 2 mass graves on his property, and there might be a 3rd and even a 4th. So I showed him the evidence. That gave him pause. He's a good guy. He said, Jesus, I don't want to have him digging out there if there's dead out there. How many are out there? I said, I don't know. There's could be like 150 guys out there. All right. And I said, you don't want that kind of publicity because, once the wrong people hear about it, it's going to be a real problem for you. And, So he's like, okay, fine. And he goes, you're a goddamn lawyer from California, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I am. And so, but he really graciously decided not to do it. And he ends up selling most of the property and easement rights and everything. And now there are plaques and there are trails. And you can go there you can go on YouTube and you can see people, talking about little parts of the battle and leading you through it, which is really cool. It's a beautiful place. One other thing, this is really important, and I forgot to say it earlier. Why was this battle important? And I'll tell you why. Johnson's division stopped 2 Union corps that would have marched directly into Lee's left rear. If Prince had been timely, Johnson's division would have been trapped and cut off way off, they're off by Raccoon Ford Road, the Raccoon Ford by the river. The 2 corps would have been between Johnson and Lee's army. That's a problem for Johnson. He'd be completely cut off with a division. If Prince had been 45 minutes later than he was, Johnson would have gotten up there with the rest of Early's men, and you'd have had 32,000 Union troops behind Lee's left rear. Whoa. What the heck would Lee do? By the time, oh, by the way, he was fighting on both roads. It's just like the Wilderness. He's fighting on the Orange Turnpike, he's fighting on the Orange Plank Road. So it's not like they're just sitting around. They're engaged, not heavily, but they're engaged. Well, if Lee finds out that there's 2 corps behind his left rear, he can't just say, okay, let's just walk backwards now. You can't. And so that's a problem. So this was a huge, impactful, small battle. Now, Johnson's plan was terrible, but his aggression scared the hell out of French. And so French hesitated. French could have wiped Johnson off that map if he had been fighting Hancock or Sickles even. Johnson would have been wiped out. But he was fighting the right guy, he was aggressive enough, and he stalled what would have been a potential disaster. Could have really destroyed Lee's army. It would have been a real problem. We would have had a major battle there on the 27th, 28th of November. Would have been major. And God knows what would have happened, because it would have been completely different than what did happen. What did happen is that when Lee found out what was over there that night, he starts breaking away, kept his skirmishers out, pulled back about 2.5 miles behind Mine Run, where they had all their defenses. Lee's army stood there behind the defenses, which were some of the strongest of the war. You go walk them today, they're huge. They're still there. And Meade gathers his army, and he's getting ready to attack, and he orders an attack along the whole line. And Warren gets back to him and says, they're too well entrenched, and you can't get in there because their flank isn't open. Meade calls off the attack just minutes before it's going to start. And then that was the end of the winter campaign, and he withdrew, and they went into winter quarters. So it was a big misfire at Mine Run, but it was Payne's farm that saved Lee's butt, and Johnson is the one that did it. Prince was sacked after this. French was sacked after this. And they should have been sacked after this. It was disastrous. But that's what happened. Yes, ma'am.
Why haven't we used a lot of literature on this?
Literature, you mean people writing about it?
Yeah.
We did a book. Yeah, we did a book on the Mine Run campaign and the emerging Civil War. I wrote an appendix on it for Chris Mikowski, I think, and I wrote about finding the battlefield and all that. It's one of those weird battles where people just don't write about it much. I think a lot of people don't understand how impactful it was. You really have to dig deep to figure it out. We have a guy named Jeff Hunt. Jeff Hunt has contributed a lot to Civil War history. He's written, he submitted it as one book, and it was about, 400,000 words. And we had a big fight because I told him we're going to divide it up into 3 books, maybe 4. And he put his foot down, and then, I said, this is how we're going to do it. He finally agreed. And now we're putting out his 3rd book at the end of the year, and it's on Rappahannock Station and Kelly's Ford, the 2 of Lee's defeats. And his 4th book, which will be out next year, is on Payne's Farm and Mine Run. And maybe we could do a Packer-Viking bet, and you can buy the book because the Vikings are going to win. Yes, sir.
Maybe a naive question. 6 months later, the beginning of the Overland campaign was started much farther north.
No, it was farther east. Yeah, and it was very similar, right? I mean, Grant crosses the ford, some of the same fords, by the way, and Lee is doing the same thing. Lee's out of position again. Lee was out of position several times. He's out of position again, and he's using those same 2 arteries, the Orange Turnpike and the Orange Plank Road, to move east. And he meets Grant, or Meade really, going south. His army is not the objective. Richmond is the objective. and Lee hits him, and the armies turn and face each other for 2 days on similar terrain using those same 2 arteries. This is a prelude to the Wilderness Campaign. It's amazing how you look at the similarities and you say, it's the Wilderness Campaign prelude. And you can see it. If you study the Wilderness Campaign, you look at this, you go, it's the same thing. Same terrain, basically. Any other questions I can, yes, sir?
When there was the delay on the Union side, did Meade write about that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can read Meade's reports. There were several letters. Excuse me, I only gave you the, I'm actually surprised I got through all this. We flew in from California this morning. The smoke is so bad you can't see 2 miles. I mean, it's just horrendous. And I'm kind of surprised I made it through the whole talk. Meade wrote about it, and when I give a tactical talk, I give a completely different talk when I do, sort of a pure battle study. And there are several messages back and forth from Meade to French to Meade, and those are all preserved. They're in the OR, and you can read them. And Meade wrote about it. There's a lot of letters about it. It's pretty well documented. Yeah, Meade was really, really angry because these guys are just 3 miles away, and they can't figure out, should I take the 2-mile route or the 4-mile route? Really? Just march. And they didn't.
So how many acres are preserved there now, you think?
I'd have to guess, but it's, I don't know, 30, 40?
Okay.
It's pretty nice. I mean, and nothing else is built inside, and it's real nice. And they might have added a lot more by now, because it's been a while since I've looked at it. But it's a decent amount of acreage. Yeah, and one of the reasons this battle is so fast, I love reading and studying stuff that is just kind of unknown because it's so fresh. And you get to look at it your own way, and you get to look at it without your head being polluted by what somebody else wrote. Because you get your own fresh impressions. It's like what you had to deal with Chamberlain, right? I mean, you had all these other people who wrote all this stuff, and you had to wade through all this nonsense. Whereas if you were doing it on first impression and look at all that, it wouldn't be hard for you to figure out what happened. But other people carve the way, and sometimes they make mistakes, and other people just are too lazy to do their own work. This is a wonderful facility you folks have. You are blessed. I'm sure all of you know you've been to other roundtables, and they're in the back of a Stuckey's restaurant somewhere, and this is really, really beautiful. And I wish I lived close by, because I'd put on my purple jersey and I'd come in here as often as I could. By the way, yeah, I saw that. That's really great. What were the Packers doing drafting Jordan? What?
Yeah.
What's this?
That's a hand you're going to slap me with if I say I'm going to.
No, it's a Viking Super Bowl ring.
Yeah. Let me tell you one thing about being a Vikings fan. You know damn well they are never going to win one while you're alive. So you just sort of have this hope, and you keep going, but you know not to expect anything. Should be an interesting season this year, since nobody knows what they've got on their teams, right? It's crazy. If there's no other questions, I want to thank you for having me, and I appreciate coming.
Chad, come on over.
You can't kiss me because my wife's here.
No, it's COVID. I couldn't do that anyway.
Oh, okay.
So we are presenting Chad tonight with our Certificate of Honor. And by order of the General Staff of the Civil War Roundtable of Milwaukee, this award is presented to Ted Savas, my buddy,
Yes, ma'am.
for furthering an understanding of the causes and consequences of the American Civil War, the watershed event in our nation's history.
Thank you, my dear.
Thank you, Chad. Oh, I'm so glad to get a hug.
Feels nice, doesn't it?
Don't go.
Oh.
I'll use the microphone. Ted, for the virtue of having been here 18 years ago, which is way too long, obviously, does already have the Iron Brigade pin, which we present to our speakers. Dennis is doing a fine job of modeling it. Thank you very much. 1990 of two surviving sons of veterans of the Iron Brigade. The custodianship was given to the Civil War Roundtable of Milwaukee. However, that's not entirely why I'm here. I'm going to do some reading. And this is Headquarters Iron Brigade Association Board of Directors of the Civil War Roundtable of Milwaukee Incorporated, Special Orders 20-09-01. Brigadier General Commanding the Iron Brigade Association and the Board of Directors of the Civil War Roundtable of Milwaukee, having taken official notice of the scholarly skill, knowledge, energy, and influence in the study of the American Civil War era of Theodore P. Savas, do hereby bestow their highest honor, the Iron Brigade Association Award for Civil War Scholarship. This award was created to recognize and promote excellence in Civil War studies, and it is expected that the awardee continue with the excellent work in the field that has earned this honor, presented this 10th day of September 2020, signed by the Adjutant for the Brigadier General Commanding, because Lance could not be here. Lance is
Yes.
the Brigadier General Commanding.
I figured he would be.
And signed by Bruce Clem, President of the Civil War Roundtable of Milwaukee. We have a certificate and a little bit of hardware that goes along with
Wow.
it. So you get a big Iron Brigade cross.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Wow.
If you haven't shopped the Savas BD website,
You better.
you don't know what you're missing.
Wow, that is really special.
2/3 of the cutting edge new scholarship on the Civil War is on that website, and without Ted, it wouldn't be published.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. That is really nice. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, my.